Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of StreamTime Sports. I am your host Nick Meacham and thrilled to be joined by technology editor Steve McCaskill. Once again, good to see you, Steve.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Now, obviously, as recording this is just after the Thanksgiving weekend, and for our American listeners, no doubt we're indulging in turkey and football. Is that something that you get into, given your interest in the NFL, or do you kind of just treat it as like any old week on your sporting calendar?
Before I had more commitments, I'd often take Black Friday off so that I could stay up and watch the late game on a Thursday. But I didn't do that this year. I was sensible and I caught about 10 minutes of Green Bay Miami live, and I thought, well, I'll record it and watch the rest another time. But years gone by, yes, absolutely, I'd be all over it. And I even missed a Black Friday game this year because I was at a live sporting event. I was at the rugby on Friday night for Harlequins against Bristol. So not as much football as usual, but I did catch Red Zone last night.
Good stuff. How cold was it out in the stadium for the Bristol Harlequins match? I've seen a lot of photos coming in from the UK lately. People getting progressively more and more wrapped up.
Oh, it's been colder. There was one time where I couldn't feel my feet, so I think it was mid-December and it was snowing, and I regretted my choice of footwear, my choice of outerwear, and the decision to go to the stadium. It wasn't a very hard man conclusion. It was horrible. Friday night was all right. And there's enough people in the in that stand. The sides are covered as well, and it was a bit milder, I think, on Friday. It's been a bit chilly in the UK. I had a cold snap. But I've definitely been colder at sporting events before.
I do often wonder, you obviously see, for those that follow the NFL, you often see those crazy fans in like Buffalo and in Green Bay where they got their shirts off and they're going crazy in sub-0 degrees Celsius temperatures or sub-32 Fahrenheit. I wonder if they're actually fully dressed the whole time and they just take it off for like 5 minutes when they know the cameras are going, or are they just that mad that they are doing that for all 4 hours? There is no way you can survive like that in those environments unless I'm missing something there.
There was one game in Green Bay where I think it must have been 3 or 4 years ago, where I think it may have been an actual threat to life had you decided to expose yourself for that long. If not, maybe limb, if not life. I can't imagine it. I mean, I saw those pictures from Buffalo over the weekend and people just sitting in snow. I mean, I think the only people in the UK that would go for that would be people from Newcastle. You've seen a lot of shirtless people there, no matter what the weather, sporting in the Premier League. But it must be for show. There's no way you can do that for 3 hours. And obviously, a lot of those stadiums are open to the elements as well. There's a lot of them don't have roofs, so it cannot be comfortable, cannot be safe.
No, it definitely can't be. Although I would, to your point about threatened to life, I think if you expose yourself in any environment, it can be a threat to life depending on where you do it. But anyway, I digress with that joke. Let's move the conversation on to some interesting topics and have caused a lot of debate around the industry. I don't think I've had a topic that I've heard more from people for such a concentrated window of time than the recent news of something that's not quite as overtly front and center of the sports media landscape. Normally when we see a lot of excitement or buzz, it's around a media rights deal happening. But this instance is quite different, and that is around the Premier League announcing that they are separating ties with IMG Production on their in-house production of content for live matches. As part of that, they have a joint venture called Premier League Productions that's been in place for 20 years or so now. And for some context, I posted something on this LinkedIn from your article, Steve, and you've obviously written quite a bit about this deal, which we want to talk a bit about today. But they're producing 6,000 hours of content every season for their 55 international broadcast partners, covering 189 markets globally, and coverage includes all 380 matches live, as well as 24/7 content service and other supporting programming that they produce as well. So Premier League and the IMG relationship has been really hand in hand through the growth phase of the Premier League and their rights expansion and revenue. No doubt it's been a lucrative partnership and a relationship and very much a win-win, and IMG's production services are in place in markets like the MLS is probably the most recent relationship, which has got a lot of coverage on the back of the MLS Apple deal, where MLS had to take on the responsibility of producing that content. It's created a lot of buzz, Steve. I just want to get your take. You've written about this on the SportsPro website and in your column. What's your view on just how significant is this actually? Because it seems in some instances that it could be nothing. In some instances, it seems to be a really significant turning point for how the Premier League's looking to take on this new era of sports media.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is a bit of a broadcast nerd story in that it's something that's happening behind the scenes that probably won't affect fans for a while. Well, definitely not until 2025, but it's or 2026, rather, whenever the PLP deal finishes. I think it's significant from an industry point of view, right? It's the Premier League, traditionally been a very hands-off organization, very small organization that's focused itself on administrative affairs, on securing rights deals. That's pretty much what it does. Sponsorship deals, and then I guess dealing with the day-to-day governance of the Premier League. But it's been very keen to be as light touch as possible. Small government, I think, is the best way to describe the Premier League. But there have been signs that it's wanting to take on a bit more of an active role in various areas. It's, I think the main reason for that is that media rights growth is, if it's not, I mean, we've seen some recent deals, it's not slowing down internationally. The Thailand or Southeast Asia deal the other week was a good sign, good sign of that. But in the UK and domestically, it is sort of plateauing, and the only increases it's getting are now by increasing inventory rather than through increasing cost per game. So I think it's recognizing that in the modern media landscape, it has to be a bit more hands-on, has to have a bit more control over the types of content it's creating and the direction it's going. Now, it would have had a significant amount of control with IMG. There's no denying that, but it's one step removed from the organization. It's not based, the new division probably won't be based, Premier League HQ either, but metaphorically it will be. It'll be part within the organization. It won't be IMG managed. And I think that's important when you're trying to be agile and adapt to trends and making sure you're on top of everything. I think that's the reason why it's done this. It's decided that it wants to be more hands-on, be able to react more ably react to the demands of sports fans, Gen Z, etc. But going back to what I said about being a sports nerd story, I don't think fans really care about who's producing the games. I think most people probably wouldn't even know it's IMG at the minute unless they stay for the end of the credits. And so what's happened, I think, is this story has gained a bit of mainstream traction because everyone's thinking, does this mean it's going to be distributing itself? And it's very different between production and distribution. And so, yeah, for me, it's a sports nerd story of significance for our industry. Probably not significant as a consumer story, but it has had that crossover.
It definitely has. I think where the question mark still raised for me from let's talk about the consumer at this stage is, yes, the live broadcast production is still the most important part of what the EPL are doing, but are they going to start creating just more content that is outside of the live match experience? One of the things when you work with an agency partner like an IMG or like, you have to have very agreed sets of terms about what is the output, and as soon as you start to play with those deals, typically agencies and service providers like to sharpen that pencil and start upping those numbers pretty quickly. And most people find that type of relationship with an agency quite difficult to manage, where obviously if it's all in-house, you have the freedom to pivot and evolve your offering and your approach to content as and when you see fit without being too prescriptive. Now, it was a joint venture, but I'm sure there were some limitations, just more, let's say, tension points on how to move quickly in those environments when you are working with a third-party provider. So my question is, the curiosity is, are they going to produce just more content? So will you start to see Premier League doing its own documentary series, its own behind-the-scenes content, its own new layers of, a bit like the NFL network? Will they create a Premier League network and have a 24/7 style offering, which for me makes a truckload of sense given the global nature of the sport and how much it's consumed across the world, to consider having something available to add into the mix of just the live matches themselves? So will consumers get extra value being offered from that perspective? And will that be offered in something else as part of their approach? Will they start to look at finally a direct-to-consumer proposition of some nature where the non-live related stuff, the stuff that is not burdened with a big media rights price tag, will that live somewhere so they can start building a relationship with fans? And who knows, lever that up in certain markets where they haven't got those media rights deals in place. So will they start to broadcast some of those matches live in markets where there are not 380 game 100% saturation of games available in those markets, which there are a lot of currently. So I think for the consumer, let's start with them. I think there is a lot of potential possibilities of why this will be a net positive, but it's not as easy as that, really, is it?
I'll start with the first part of your question about the type of content. You're right. The agreement between Premier League and IMG will probably have, it will be very specific about what IMG does. Of course, they'll have meetings and they'll determine what they can do, what they want to do for the upcoming season. For example, I think that there's a couple of examples of that innovation at play. The creation of a fantasy football program that will have come from that. The stats-driven simulcasts, which have been made available to some international broadcasters, that will have been a discussion, presumably also with the Premier League's partner in Oracle. So there's definitely room to maneuver, but I guess there's not really much autonomy in terms of what they can do. And if you're the Premier League, you're also going to be fully aware of what retained rights you have as well, and what you can do in each market. You're going to have intimate knowledge of the rights deals that they have and what's possible and what's not. So there's that ability just to be quicker off the mark, just be, decide to roll with something. And, PLP, it's introduced new cameras, new technology, and in various instances, IMG is one of the best in the game at this. It's not, it's a really good organization to partner with. So it's not like that. I don't think the Premier League is necessarily unhappy with it at all. That's not been a suggestion. There was a joint statement on it which suggests that this is quite an amicable split, and IMG President Adam Kelly is basically trying to be as transparent as he can. So even though there's they would like to retain the contract, it's no suggestion that it's an issue with IMG, which I think is really important to state. With regards to what it could do, and I think you're right to make the NFL comparison, or at least the US major leagues. NFL, I know NFL would like to perhaps get rid of a stake in NFL media, but that's because it's much further along in its journey. It's a much more mature operation, and a lot of those major league media operations were built for, I guess, a cable era anyway. They wanted some of those carriage fees. That's why they created all this. Premier League obviously isn't going to that it's not the model really. B, that ship's probably sailed anyway. So I think we're going to see more types of social content. I think that's obvious. Like pushing onto digital platforms, making sure they're everywhere that the fan base is. I definitely think docuseries are going to be a thing. And again, I think it comes back to what you just said in terms of the awareness of those contracts and what's possible. It's going to be a lot easier to clear footage and things like that, or know what's available, what market, what they can and can't do. And then it also frees them up to work with a global streamer if they wanted to. Like a Premier League behind the scenes documentary on Netflix, for example, would be. I'm just pulling the name out of thin air, but that would be something that could be possible. And then ultimately, I think they would really like a D2C service, but I'm going to qualify that quite a bit. I think they've already got the Premier League content service, which is basically a linear feed of all this content that's producing. So the post-match shows, pre-match shows, what have you, that's already available to international broadcasters, but it's not a proper 24/7 network. It's just, you can position it that as if you want to. I think we're definitely going to see some sort of Premier League network, or working title, obviously, made available to broadcasters who want it. So let's say they're positioning it as a super service. They can add it to their streaming platforms, take it wholesale, they can add it to their linear TV platforms. A bit like La Liga TV, I think, is it's not quite the same thing, but it's similar in concept in terms of what can be made available. There could be live games on there, could not. There'd be opt-outs, opt-ins. I think the way of doing that is, if I guess overseas Premier League fans, they're really passionate because I think you have to be to follow a team that's not in your country, right? You tend to be, you always have casual fans, but I think you're going to have a lot of really engaged fans who the ability to follow the league and their team remotely is a really big deal. And so therefore a 24/7 Premier League channel is going to really appeal. The second thing is it's going to add value to the media rights deals. They say, look, give us a bit of an uplift. We'll give you this 24/7 Premier League channel that you can then market to your customers. So I think that's what we're going to see. We're not going to see a D2C service replacing those deals because the Premier League just doesn't need to. Its product is in demand. There's growth internationally. I think it's going to be value added. But further to your point, it gives them the option to do it if they wanted to, and it's a really good negotiating tactic. And I think it's probably a more convincing negotiating tactic than someone like Ligue 1 in domestically saying we'll stick all our rights on a D2C service, we'll charge X amount a month, and we're going to try and get 2 million subscribers. Good luck. Like, it's that's your main domestic rights deal. Whereas internationally, the Premier League was very close to doing this in Singapore, I think in 2019, and eventually it decided to go a more traditional route. And I think that's because that's what it knew and that's what it felt it could do. I think it didn't want to get involved in going D2C. We've discussed this before. D2C is hard, right? Like it's not, it's not simply flicking on a switch. And I think having this content arm is going to make that a lot easier, and maybe a lot easier to call the broadcaster partners bluff. And I know there are certain former Premier League chairman who pushed this idea of Premflix, and I believe he's on TalkSport again this week saying the Premier League have stolen my idea. Right. But I'm trying to think of all sorts of fantasy economics and trying to come up with something that would deliver the 5 billion over 4 years that the Premier League currently gets. And Nick, you're better with numbers than I am. Perhaps you have the answer, but it's certainly not something with my A-level grade economics could come up with.
Yeah, look, I mean, we won't go into too deep on the numbers crunching, but the numbers that were shared around by, was it Steve Parish at the time, I think, from Crystal Palace chairman? Was that right? No.
Simon Jordan.
Simon Jordan, that's right. Yeah. Apologies, Steve Parish, for being blasphemous with your name.
If you're listening.
But, yeah, if you're listening. Oh, no doubt he is. Yeah. We've seen just generally that there's a lot of difficulties around driving subscription-led businesses as a standalone, and advertising needs to be a core revenue stream, I think, moving forward for anyone who's trying to move into the D2C space still, but it's only still early stages in markets like Europe and further abroad. So whether those numbers add up, that's going to be a different ball game, but I do think they need to have a proposition there if they would want it to be a legitimate negotiation tool, not just talk about that it might come. It's actually there, and this will allow them to do it. There is a whole host of markets that exist in the world that do not use and have the breadth of Premier League's, say, arsenal of games, that they can start wrapping this together with having a real marginal impact. And the quicker they get up and running with a D2C proposition of some nature, take, for example, in markets like where I'm at the moment in Jamaica, the fandom around the Premier League is insane here. Like, I see every other car with a logo of a team driving down the street. Every other's probably a bit dramatic, but every other car of probably a middle-aged or younger man driving the streets has a logo of one of the teams on it. I never see that for the local league. I never see that visibility like the Premier League. There's true fandom here, but at the moment there's been some sort of bidding war over time, and those rights are sort of sitting in a bit of a limbo zone, not really being accessible for the local fan. So they could easily have the conditions to bring it into their own offering, make it accessible, visible to everyone, make it easy to get into, and build their own audience in this market. So for next right cycle, they have a legitimate player there. Because at the moment, most people over in a market like this are watching through pirated means because they can't get access to it as easily as you would think. There are some games on the main premium networks, but it's not the 380. So, and the fandom around single teams is real here. It's real. It's legit. And this is one market of 200. So they need it for these markets as well. Even it doesn't have to be a huge investment. They need something that they can point people to, even if it's in the main live broadcast, that they'll have more control of. They can be marketing their own platforms like the NFL has as well. So I think it's something they need to do and build out more a 365 offering with that storytelling around the live event, not just the live matches itself, which is what we see the EPL synonymous with in terms of where and how it's consumed to date.
They don't need in other markets. They don't need the live games. It's very possible to build a service, and of course, it's not going to be just a linear service. It's going to be on demand. It's going to have other elements. They've already got an application. They've already got an extremely popular fantasy game that is really underused. I think they are starting to wise up to that. I think in terms of not just from a content point of view, but in terms of who they've got in the league. Alexander Willis joining from the England club. I think it was the year before last, or last year, which was a sign of what they intend to do with that. And even if you look at there's no one better at making the most of what it's got than the NFL. And the NFL has NFL Plus, and that's it's a mixture of not necessarily rights that people don't want, but it's got the mobile streaming element to it, which again, as a category, doesn't really exist in Premier League because you don't have that weird cable over the air, digital, mobile breakdown of rights. But they've got has Red Zone in it, which is perhaps something they could be spun out in some markets. It's got stats, it's got news, it's got all the social content, it's got audio. So the Premier League currently sells its global audio rights to TalkSport, and I think they distribute and they put it in some languages. I don't know how much that contract is worth, but could they build that into a service so it's almost like a super fan service that doesn't have any live games, or might they could have one live game. Perhaps they could keep a game for themselves in some markets and then agree a distribution deal if they are working with a platform holder. So it just gives them the freedom, just gives them they can try these different models. It's a way to extract growth beyond pure licensing fees, which is what the Premier League's been built on to date. So it's many things. I just don't expect there to be wholesale changes overnight. The Premier League's very good at staggering its contracts as well, so it's not reliant on the cycle ending and all of a sudden it's panicking. So we could see a bit more of iterative innovation in some markets. But I think Premier League's been really influenced by the US, and I think it's just the latest phase of it.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about the fact that the La Liga as a approach, and the app they've had, the platform they've had, is one example to look at. We've talked about the NFL media side briefly as well. One of the ones that stands out to me, though, is probably most like for like, depending on what they do on the D2C side, is actually the DFL's approach. I've spoken to them countless times over the years, as I'm sure you have, about their glass-to-glass strategy that really was rolled out by Andreas Hayden under his leadership when he was part of the DFL Digital Sports Group. At Bundesliga, basically, the approach that I've spoken to him and others about over the years, the reason they call it glass-to-glass is they own everything that happens in the glass-to-glass. So basically, from the camera lens to the TV screen in terms of distribution, the content creation, etc. And one of the things that helped the Bundesliga achieve was the ability to make sure that they were offering some of those customizations that they needed to help broadcasters or to, I guess, basically super serve them. If they wanted something specific, they could do that very easily. One of the other benefits of having a glass-to-glass strategy is it opens up the door for more broadcasters and the tech platforms, and to be able to negotiate deals with them, because a lot of them don't have their own production services in-house, and they can buy basically kind of almost an out-of-a-box offering, which is basically really important when you want to talk seriously to people like YouTube, Netflix, DAZN, and all those other companies that are looking to kind of like productify these partnerships and relationships in what we've seen with the NFL do with the Game Pass as an example, or Sunday Ticket. Basically opening up the door to take away some of the burden and strain from potential broadcast partners. And that also is a way of driving up the revenue of some of those deals, because you're actually providing something that they need and they would otherwise be taking out of their own respective P&Ls. Because let's face it, the IMG relationship would not have been a cheap one. They're probably the best in the business, or definitely one of the best in the business in production. They were probably paying a premium for that. Well, that premium can be transferred to some of these deals if they get the structure right. So I think we look towards the Bundesliga approach. There's a lot of learnings there as to what they could be doing here to try and take more control, add more creativity to some of the deals, and basically take away some of the burden of that some other incumbent broadcasters or traditional broadcasters and other and streaming platforms had in terms of bidding for their rights down the line.
Yeah, I think that's definitely been a factor in a couple of recent deals. I think, for example, WWE, and that produces everything. So Netflix didn't have to go in and do that. Whereas, I mean, it's probably a bit more manageable when it's a small package. So I think the NFL game is going to be produced by CBS. I think is going to be do it for them. So they've gone in and done that traditional working with a production company route for that. But that's one day. That's not a huge commitment, so to speak. But then you look at Apple TV and MLS, which you referred to earlier. That's been baked into the deal. It was MLS that had to organize production, had to work with IMG, so it's having to manage that relationship itself. So that I think it would definitely appeal to, if you're a streamer, yes, you might have lots of might have lots of capital to spend on something, but you don't necessarily want to get involved in or having all those fixed overheads by having your own, either having your own production resources or managing that relationship and having those contracts yourself. So I think there is perhaps some truth to that in terms of who they can perhaps attract to the table next cycle. Say, look, this is lower commitment. Feel free to bid more because you don't have to take this on. We can do it. We can do it for you. So I think there's an element of that. And as you point out the Bundesliga relationship, the Bundesliga has done a really good job internationally, given its relative profile to. Let's say compare it to La Liga. La Liga you'd have thought would be really popular internationally. Serie A's got some really historic clubs, but doesn't quite have the international profile that the Bundesliga does, particularly in parts of Asia. And I think that is down to the fact it controls production and it's got marketing arms as well, promoting the league abroad. So it definitely fits into those international development plans. In terms of cost, I don't think this is a cost play for the Premier League. I know they'll be paying IMG quite a bit, but they're going to have to spend on a lot of stuff to get this up and running. I think they'll be hoping to recoup this elsewhere. I don't think that's the issue. But even though IMG will be well remunerated for their work, but then they've already got the facilities in place. They work. There might be people who work across multiple. They work with the EFL, for example. There could be that involved.
Probably more of a return on investment potential there is that their investments into their own content production business might be able to bring a far better return because of all the things we've talked about than pure cost saving play, which I don't think the EPL is doing. And even the recent deal that I think you covered as well, as recently as last week, they're still doing some pretty major Premier League rights deals. 560 million for that Thai broadcast deal with Jasmine, which is unbelievable. It covers Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos for 3 years, but could extend to 6 seasons. Who knew that those types of deals could still happen? But they pulled an absolute wild card out of the pack. Let's talk about that one briefly, Steve. Did you cover that story, or are you across it?
I'm across it. I didn't cover it personally, but it's given the profile of the league. The size of the sum, size of the fee did surprise me. Like that is, you kind of forget just how valuable these rights are in certain markets. I think you're looking at obviously domestically is a huge contract. The US now is a huge contract. The Nordics have always been traditionally quite a big contract. They've had live English football before England did. So it's not surprising. That's the main mover in the market, to be honest, as a Premier League, which is quite remarkable when you think about it. And I think it's a combination of this fandom that's cultivated over time, but then also digital distribution. And pay TV was a really high barrier to entry. And yes, I know we can talk about piracy and that being a huge problem, but there's no denying it's much easier to subscribe to a streaming service if you've got even just a mobile contract than it would be to getting a satellite dish or having a cable installed. So I think that's a factor. And then I think depending on country by country, I'm wondering if betting has an impact as well, but maybe not as much as the other two things. I think those two are much bit. I'd say, fandom and accessibility is probably more important than betting when compared to some of the US deals that we've seen recently. I think those, but it probably isn't insignificant.
Yeah, look, ultimately, it's a significant moment in terms of opening up the playbook basically for the Premier League. I would not expect them to walk away from any of their existing major relationships with Sky Sports or NBC or alike because of this, and go solo and create their own Premflix and go try and target that sort of marketplace. I think this is just layering up a value add to those partners, basically to try and make sure that they continue to provide more value and drive up more media rights deals values in the meantime. What that might still happen also is that direct-to-consumer play, which we've talked about. So let's have to wait. We'll have to wait and see what they do. But definitely an interesting, not just the deal itself, but the fact that Premier League is now officially expanding their playbook and becoming a true bona fide sports media business, which is all very exciting to see. Final question on this one before we move on to the next topic I want to talk to you about, Steve, is just for IMG. Just what's your take on, do you think this is a sign of things to come for them, that they will potentially consider not focusing as much on the growth side of their production business and keep focusing on what they're most known for, is those commercial rights type of relationships with other sports properties? Or do you think this is just one deal gone and they'll continue to do what they do?
Short answer is I think it's one deal gone. I think there's a lot going on at IMG, given the recent transfer of ownership and being going on its own a little bit with TKO and those two big properties under that banner. But not everyone is a Premier League. The Premier League is this huge global phenomenon, and that can go on its own. And the other thing is, a lot of the companies that do have a lot of in-house production facilities, I'm going to say perhaps they're often like newer or challenger brands as well that have built it up that way because that's the only way they'll do it. There's loads of other properties that aren't big enough to go out on it alone and aren't new enough to have done it differently by building up their own digital infrastructure just organically. It's got big deals with other leagues. It's just expanded its EFL contract. I mean, even today, I think it's expanded some, not quite the same thing, but it's still working with a lot of these major properties, even ones that it doesn't have a production for, like NHL and what have you. I think Premier League was a nice shop window. I think it was also quite very prestigious for IMG to work with the Premier League. It's 20 years. It's a global success story. It's like, we do this for the Premier League. We could do this for you. If you look at the growth in international broadcast deals since IMG started working in the Premier League, it's massive. It's 2004 they started, and that was sort of like 2004 is probably the year that you see. And for me, it's a before and after the Premier League that year. That's when it goes from being a very successful domestic league to being this global phenomenon. And I think PLP's definitely played a role in that, and it was just a wonderful case study. But equally, it can still use that. I don't know. I'm not privy to the financial terms of the deal, so I don't know what's going to happen on the bottom line. But yeah, I think it's more of a reputational thing than a financial matter. And I don't think we're going to start. It's not going to be the beginning of an exodus.
No, I don't think so. But I would say that IMG's growing trend has been, like most agency-led businesses, is to try and have some skin in the game somehow, some way. So I think they might look at opportunities as they present themselves on the production front, but otherwise they want to constantly be chasing those commercial deals wrapped all together with those rights. And perhaps that's the value add, is the digital expertise, their content production expertise, why you should be doubling down in a commercial relationship with them to have some shared skin in the game rather than more of a traditional sort of agency relationship.
I think that's fair. And also, working with agencies in that way is never in the Premier League style. It's not really it's not really offloaded its rights to one of the big agencies before. It's always, again, small organization, small government, but a lot of that is people negotiating rights deals.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the final thing I want to talk about, another big story that's probably been over the last few weeks sent as many industry commentary shockwaves, for want of a better way to describe it, as I've seen for some time across the sports streaming landscape. And that was the delivery of the Netflix Jake Paul and Mike Tyson bout, which was built up over a long time. It's been set to hit our streaming waves over the last 12 months or so. It got delayed at one stage. It finally got delivered. So, Steve, just talk the audience through about some of the numbers that they did achieve, why it is such a big streaming event, and then we can talk about some of the challenges along the way that they've had.
Yeah, I'm going to prefix all of this by saying I think it's important not to read too much into, or at least overplay the significance of this. But there's no denying the figures, right? It's more than 60 million households, peaking at 65 million concurrent streams for the main event between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Even from a physical standpoint, 72,500 people in AT&T Stadium. It's the best attended boxing event ever in the US outside of Las Vegas. Some gate receipts is $80 million. I think the biggest thing for me was the 50 million that watched Katie Taylor and Serrano. That was, that's the most watched women's boxing match of all time, and they think it will probably be the biggest audience for a women's sporting event in the US ever. So those are the figures. I can't argue with those at all. But I do think it's really important to state not necessarily the novelty factor in all this of having live sport on Netflix, because it speaks to the reach of Netflix platform. They can get people watching sport like this. That is significant. That's huge. But I think it is a case of people seeing it. Obviously Jake Paul has got a big following. Mike Tyson's got a big following. People just want to see how it performs, what the program's like. So yeah, I think you can definitely read things into that. But I think longer term coming into the sports industry, I'm a bit more guarded on it. But for me, again, I know I said before, the Taylor and Serrano figure is outstanding. Like that's that's a real positive for this, and it's also the most serious sporting action that's ever been shown on Netflix. Let's be honest, based on
Yeah.
what's done so far.
Yeah, 50 million is definitely an incredible number. And what I actually take away from that number is more the stickiness of the audience to have 50 million tuning in for that. You know, I don't think all 50 million were tuning in just for that fight, but they were there well in advance on the build up to that event, and they stayed on the platform to watch multiple bouts. It wasn't just a tune in, tune out experience, which can sometimes happen in a live sports game. Obviously, the model that they took with this wasn't a pure pay-per-view. It wasn't a pay-per-view play. It was available freely on the Netflix platform, which basically there was still an acquisition tool for Netflix to drive as many people to the platform as they possibly could, but without that pay-per-view barrier to entry, which has been what these fights, the Paul fights, and pretty much every other major boxing fight has been following for decades now. So I think just that stickiness plus the approach that Netflix took to just try and get as many people to the platform as possible, use this as a really big engagement tool, I think is pretty profound and impressive. That's for sure. The other thing that I took away from when I was in Madrid 2 weeks ago, I was talking to, I think it was the CTO of Disney Hotstar, although I'm not sure what they're called now because of the Reliance relationship. But he's basically he's sort of 2IC behind Sanjay Gupta, who we've had on the podcast previously. And he was saying that they delivered something like, for the IPL final, 60 million concurrents for the IPL on streaming and a further 130 OTA. So let's just put those numbers in perspective of that. Once again, we just have to remember that the Indian market is absolutely insane in scale and dwarfs everything we talk about in the Western world in terms of reach. There's different challenges on the delivery side, of course, given various reasons, but that is a pretty impressive performance in itself. Although we're talking about the Netflix thing here, they are heralded because they deliver these numbers. You know, nearly 200 million people for a live event, and they deliver it pretty flawlessly in comparison. Which obviously Netflix had some challenges in their delivery. What's your take on all that, Steve?
We'll get to those technical challenges in a second, but I think that's really good context for what's been achieved here. And the reason why I'm not as, let's say, going overboard as some other people is, like, this event was heavily promoted on Netflix front page. Again, there was a novelty factor. You need to look at what, Netflix now publishes a lot more of its data, which is fantastic for people like us. And you can see how many viewers one of these prestige dramas that costs, I don't know, 100 million episode, and how many viewers that can get, and how many, in theory, how many, you can't see how many subscribers that attracted, but you can at least make some sort of analysis from it. And you see that's, I don't know, number one or number two in their most watched that week. And then a 7-year-old ITV drama is number 4, and Netflix is probably paying about £15,000 for that. So the point of this is that Netflix platform can make something huge like that. You see old films all of a sudden becoming we don't really have water cooler conversations anymore, but people start, oh, have you seen this? And this film was 6 years ago because they've just got the license to it. So I think that's just, Netflix can do this, but maybe it can't do it forever. If it can't, there's diminishing returns maybe from an event like this. And I think if it gets into sport more regularly, or has a more ongoing commitment to sport, that would be much more interesting to follow. Of course, WWE is coming, but I think WWE is a little bit different. I know I'm a wrestling fan, and I think we can treat it as sport because its business model is like sport. It's presented as a sport, etc. It's organized like a sport. But I think the audience is different because it's more of a, it's not necessarily supporters. It's more of an ongoing, the way you consume it, and it is a bit more like a television show because it's not live. It is live, but for lots of people it isn't. So I think there are important distinctions there. So I'm not sure we're going to get that same level of insight with WWE. Depends if they go for something else, I think. And we're not going to get from the NFL because it's 1-2 games a year. So that's kind of where I am with Netflix. I think the great figures, I completely get why people are excited, but your example is just a perfect reason why we should have some context. And then, of course, we're about to discuss something else that's important in terms of what Netflix has done.
Well, obviously, this has put a lot of people on watch because they did have some technical delivery challenges. I mean, you can go on LinkedIn, whether it's on my feed or other feeds, and you will see constant chatter from people both within the industry and around it talking about the delivery challenges. Some people saying it was unwatchable. Some people just talking about the good old-fashioned buffering days of streaming earlier on, where you would just have to sit and be patient for it to catch up and never really getting the full experience. In other markets, it was absolutely flawless. The picture was great. It seems like most of those challenges were in the US, where obviously there was probably the most dense viewership from what I have seen. But what's some of the takeaways of this? There was clearly some technical challenges that were on delivery. They were very quick to just celebrate the positives and not mention any of those technical challenges in any releases, which is definitely a common approach by major commercial institutions, is to just ignore the negative stuff and just focus on the positives. But just what's your view on how significant were those technical challenges actually in the grand scheme of things? Were they as robust and profound as perhaps the people in our industry were making out to be?
Well, Jake Paul seemed happy because he said we crashed the site. He seemed very happy with it's when people say we broke the internet. I think the challenges weren't, or the impact wasn't insignificant. But I think again, the reason why Netflix has been having these various live events and perhaps deliberately not making them its most, it's not been proper sport yet, really, is so it learns all this and what it needs to do in terms of distribution, how it has a content delivery network that can withstand that kind of demand. It's interesting you said that most of the issues were in the US, where there was most demand for the stream, because I would have put it down to perhaps there was more global interest, based on no fact at all, because of the profile of Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. So I was wondering if that would have been a factor. I mean, we can end the podcast here just by saying streaming is hard. Even for a company of Netflix resources. Yeah, end of podcast. But I think this live infrastructure is one of the reasons why it hasn't gone to sport so much yet, why it waited as long as possible. I mean, there were business reasons as well, but I think you fundamentally have to change your architecture to support these peaks in demand. Something that Disney Hotstar, or whatever they will be referred to henceforth, is well aware of. If it's learned something and it can put it into practice, this would have definitely been a worthwhile exercise. It's by far and away the most high profile thing it's done. If you look at the celebrity golf tournaments and the exhibition matches that it's had before, they probably won't get the same audience for the NFL. I think it's the other thing to take into account, but it will be more US focused. So if the problems are in the US, it's really got to double down on the capacity there, because if you can't get the NFL right, people are going to hear about it, people are going to talk about it. I think Netflix has a huge subscriber base, so there might be a bit of a bump on ratings. I think there'll be a novelty factor again. I think seeing how Netflix will do it. Christmas Day, I'm still not sure how that's going to impact on people who are desperate to watch sport and people who might be with their families. I'm really not sure how that's going to play in, but if you look at Amazon's figures or Peacock's figures, you can sort of get a bit of an idea of how it's going to perform against a traditional broadcast, but then you can probably add extra 5-6 million or something like that on it. So I think it'd be less than the Jake Paul fight, but it'll be more US focused. Although, I'll be tuning in probably because my family will probably be asleep by the time it's broadcast in the UK and I'm wanting to watch some sports. So, yeah, I think those are technical takeaways I'm taking away from it. I think it's probably just another step forward in this technical roadmap that Netflix has got. And I'm pretty confident the NFL is going to be fine on Christmas Day.
I think they'll get there, and perhaps this is an opportunity for them to really test their systems and see. Most of their technical infrastructure, from what I understand, I'm not a real tech expert. I actually do want to get someone on at some stage to really nerd out on some of the tech aspects of this. But ultimately, a lot of it is done in-house, whereas they're not using a lot of the third parties in the same way, which has some pros and it has some cons in the same way we've been talking about the EPL, IMG relationship. If you do it in-house, there's some pros about you controlling your destiny, but you have to constantly keep innovating. And if you want to take bolder bets, then you have to be ready for it. One thing I would say I'm pretty confident on is that the NFL Christmas games themselves, they're heavy on selling advertising on it. I think they've said they've nearly sold out on those. They're going to be looking for that to be a real commercial cash cow for them. And this fight probably has some of that, like it's driving acquisition, but in a very different way. And I think that's something they're going to be really looking for to be a lucrative investment. But I doubt it will get the same scale, to your point, of audience that this fight does, because it won't be. it won't. The NFL isn't a global powerhouse in the same, or globally attractive sport to fans at that tier 1 level that this type of event can bring together on a platform like Netflix. So we'll have to wait and see. But I don't have too many concerns about this. My big concern of this is just a reminder that this sort of scale and everything Netflix is doing is around entertainment related things, because this fight since then has been largely very speculated as to what's going on. There's video of Tyson pulling a punch or two when he could have potentially knocked out Paul, and there's rumors running around that they've been banned, and I don't know what the deal is, but basically they've played this. They're leaning into the entertainment space with the hot dogs and everything else they've been doing, all the competitions, the golf tournaments. The NFL is going to be the first one they're really going into proper pro sport, and that's going to be a real litmus test for them, I think.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the nature of the contest. Firstly, I haven't seen it. Secondly, I'm definitely not the target audience at all. For me, I said the Serrano Taylor. If I was watching, if I was going to watch something, it would have been that. The final point I really want to make is all this talk about streaming future fans. You need to get it right. I think there's local distribution for the games in their respective markets for the NFL. So couple of things that benefits that will have is, one, it will take some of the stress off the infrastructure, and the second is you might have fewer people complaining. So there's that, and it means we've seen that. We've seen I think Peacock have done that with their exclusive games on streaming. ESPN often push out some Monday Night Football games on ABC in the US. I think it's partly just to mitigate that threat. So that'll have an impact on ratings and also an impact on complaints and technical elements. So yeah, you're right. This is sport. It's not entertainment, and I think that they're making sure that it goes off without a hitch.
Look, that's a pretty good spot to wrap up, Steve, and some great points, I think, to finish on. For those that are listening in, make sure you do follow Steve on social media. The handle Mickey Caskill, I think, is the normal one you use, or on LinkedIn as good old just Steve McCaskill. And also, you have a newsletter you publish regularly with the same branding of the StreamTime Sports newsletter. So make sure you subscribe to that on SportsPro's main website. A lot of the stuff that Steve writes about there is great insight, and a lot of stuff links into what we've been covering today over the last couple of editions of that newsletter. So Steve, I think that's probably a good time to wrap up. Thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me again.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review, and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsPro Nick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, StreamTimers. Until next time.